This is perhaps one of the most difficult things to do. A house is on fire. There's been an accident. You were in an accident. And all kinds, everything is just literally haywire. And you're supposed to maintain composure, aka mental stability. We hear that it's the ability to maintain emotional, psychological, and behavioral equilibrium despite the intense pressures or challenges posed by the current situation. It said that it helps you to navigate the crisis effectively, whether personal, societal, or global. Please help me. We have Miracle Ihoma with us, as you can see on the screen. He is a clinical psychologist to help us understand this whole thing. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
How are you maintaining mental stability?
How are you maintaining it, sir?
Me?
Yes.
It's my job to ask the questions. That's one of the ways I address it.
Because I'm sure you are doing a good job with that. Yes. Yeah. How I'm able to maintain mental stability in crisis is a lot of ways, but there is also the role of preparing for crisis even before they come. Yes, because every one of us is going to go through crisis situations at different points in our lives. I really like to say that there are only three kinds of people in relation to crisis: those in a crisis, those about to go into a crisis, those who just came out of a crisis. Every one of us belong into one of these categories. So you're either in a crisis right now, about to go into a crisis, or you're just coming out of one. So it's very important that you prepare for that crisis, right? Because if you're not prepared for it, it's going to overwhelm you when it eventually comes. That's not to say that you are expecting problems. There's a difference between expecting and preparing for problems. It's that you are preparing for it so that when it comes, you are in that mental and emotional state to deal with it. Because I've even said that even good things can pose crisis situations. Good things can have bad effects. Yes. Something as good as traveling abroad has sent many people into a crisis situation. Something as good as giving birth to a new baby.
Those who go abroad, that is a good thing. But the problem is they didn't prepare.
Exactly.
They were not expecting what they met.
They did not prepare adequately for it. Even marriage. People going to marriage, everybody's celebrating that a new marriage is born, but then that could pose an emotional and mental threat to either one or the two parties involved in that marriage, depending on how prepared they are for that marriage. Even a new job, promotion. So it's very important that we prepare mentally and emotionally for crisis even before they come.
Okay, Miracle.
Yeah.
I mean, in a country as religious as Nigeria, what you're saying now will look like you are using your mouth to think, to say bad things and attract bad things to yourself. How can you sit down and be preparing for crisis which hasn't come yet? It's like you want to invite crisis.
Yeah.
It means you don't have faith.
Thank you. You don't have exactly. That's what the typical Nigerian would tell you.
There's a thin line between faith and wisdom. A very thin line. And you could be operating in foolishness and think you're operating in faith. Right, and at the same time, you can also be operating in foolishness and think you're operating in wisdom. So there's a thin line between faith and wisdom, and it's important to know and decipher that thin line, right? Preparing for Christ, like I said, is not the same thing as expecting or calling crisis into your life. No, it's just that you know that at one point or the other there'll be challenging situations. That's what makes us human beings. That's what makes us
part of life.
A part of life, right? Challenges are an integral part of life. In fact, without challenges, life will be boring. Challenges is what makes life interesting. Yeah, and that's a perspective as well. Because if one doesn't have this perspective, it also means they might not even be able to deal properly with crisis when it comes. Because if I have a perspective that, challenges make life interesting. When I have a challenge, I say, wow, this is an interesting thing. Let me now display and exhibit the wisdom God has given me in this situation and how to handle it.
So essentially, it's about, first of all, about your perception of the situation.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, when you say preparing mentally, please help us see if you can decrypt it.
Okay.
Because as Alero said, God forbid, it's a default for many of us in Africa in particular. We just ended a conversation on education, and there are those who would have said, look, there are some things that we shouldn't even be talking about. Unfortunately, we are talking about those things today. So, when you say preparing mentally for something that has not occurred, what do you mean? For instance,
okay,
I have a very good job. I'm doing my job well. I am acing all my numbers, and I am bringing goodwill to my organization. But for some reason, something happens in the organization, rather to the organization, and I am one of those people affected by the restructuring or reorganization the company has to do so that the organization, can remain afloat.
Yep.
What's my own? I did everything I was supposed to do. I'm a good staff. I'm a productive staff.
Yeah.
So, what did I do?
You didn't do anything. You didn't do anything. And if that person has been adequately prepared, for instance, it would mean that, number one, it won't even take time for the person to get a new job, because the person has been preparing for the future of either that organization or his or her own future, to say that, okay, I don't want to remain at this level forever. And sometimes because for you to even get from one level to the next level, sometimes there has to be a disruption. And some of those times you initiate the disruption. Some other times circumstances initiates it.
Okay, so you can sometimes
initiate the disruption yourself and say, I'm leaving this organization. Even though sometimes it might look bleak, it might look like there might be uncertainties about what the future holds for you. But you can initiate that disruption and say you're leaving, right? But it can also happen that the organization is sending you out of, is maybe reorganizing like you said, or they're even sacking you. But any of which is the fact that it is an initiation, and at least that's how I choose to look at it. For my next step. Okay, you were laid off.
They're laying you off.
Talking about laying off.
Yes.
You talked about those who can prepare for it. Okay, there was an example Alero, talked about earlier, in the previous conversation, where civil servants, they called them then super PAMSECs and permanent secretaries of the Federal Civil Service. They were laid off by the government
unceremoniously.
And according to some of our guests who discussed it,
in fact, their sacking was announced on radio.
Yes,
without them even knowing.
They heard that they had been
they
fired.
heard it. Probably didn't get a letter or anything.
No.
So there is nothing to prepare them for that.
Yes.
Now, it could still happen today.
Yes.
A building, God forbid, a building collapses. People die.
Yeah.
And the people whose lives were attached to the people who died, they are right automatically in a crisis.
Yes.
There's nothing that could have prepared them for that. How do you even, first of all, balance out?
Yeah.
How do you prepare for a thing like that?
Yeah. For that kind of a thing, you definitely wouldn't have prepared for it. There's no way you would have known that, okay, something like that is coming. There's certain things you know are coming, that you prepare for. There's certain things you don't know are coming that meets you, quote unquote, unprepared. But then, how you have also nurtured yourself emotionally and mentally, that would now be the emotional and mental preparation that you have had before that time, would also determine how you handle it. That's why, that's a crisis situation where, say, 15 people were laid off. You might realize that 2 people might decide to take their life. 2 other people might decide to go to the village. 3 other people might decide to start a business and then thrive in 5 years. 5 other people might get another job. So you are wondering, one other person might go into depression. Another one might be hospitalized. You are wondering, how come the same thing happened to all of them, but they responded differently to it? That's to say that their emotional and mental bandwidth was different. And one of the things that helps you, just like you mentioned earlier, is also your interpretation of that situation. Right? If you see that situation as the end of your life, you are definitely going to respond to it that way. I tell people that it is not circumstances that determines our emotions and actions. No. It is actually our interpretation of circumstances that determines our emotions and our actions. That is why people respond differently to the same thing. If it was circumstances that determines our emotional and action or reactions, then people should respond and feel exactly the same way to the same things. The fact that we all respond differently means that it could not be this thing that is causing somebody to feel this way or act this way. It is their interpretation of it. One person was laid off. He said, wow, this is an opportunity to start more intelligently. And he starts a business. And that person was laid off. He says, I've been working this place for 25 years. My life is over. Where will I even start from? And then he goes to the village. The same thing happened to them. They responded differently. Or goes to the lagoon. Because of their interpretation of that situation.
But, the people who are already, there's no one can argue with the sense that you're making. Mr. Hoover, let's be honest about that. I mean, it's like knowing that, look, at the end of the day, something is going to happen. I'm going on the streets, for instance, I hit my leg and I fall. I have 2 options. Either I stay down there or I get up. Even if I decide to stay down there, I could either rot there or I get people to lift me up. Yeah. So it's part of the... But how about people who struggled to get to a particular level just to balance out? We've had cases of inferno in the markets. Channels Television has covered quite a bit. And I think it was in Ibadan or even in Lagos, I don't remember quite correctly. And the woman was crying that every investment she has was in a particular warehouse that got burnt, totally destroyed. No insurance, nothing, no fallback position and anything. How does one get out of that? Now, on the other hand, now let's make that scenario worse. So someone lost everything, and while still brewing and moping over that one, hears of the death of a child.
Wow.
You see? You said wow.
Of course.
So they bring that. We don't even have the culture in our country of going to see a psychologist. Yeah. How does that kind of person prepare? Because what I hear you say is to maintain mental stability, you have to just be prepared for anything. That's what I hear you saying. But how do you prepare for such things that are almost unthinkable, such as these?
Yes. So, like I said, there are things you can't prepare for. But in that moment when it happens, you also need to see the positive side to it, or look at more rational, look at that situation in a more rational way. Yes, because there's what is called rational thinking and irrational thinking. Yeah, rational thinking is not necessarily right or wrong thinking. It is what is a rational thing to think about the situation. And there are also irrational ways to think about a situation. For example, the scenario you painted, an inferno happened, burnt everything they have worked for many years for, and hears about the death of a child. That's it's a very disastrous situation. Yes, there are actually 2 ways. You could begin to think about irrational things like your life is over. The reason it's irrational is because if you look at the intricacies of that statement, your life is not really over because you are still even alive. So that's irrational. A rational way to think is, okay, this is a disastrous situation. You are not being blind to the situation. You are not trying to faith it in that sense and make it look like it doesn't exist. You are saying this is a disastrous situation, but I know I can come out of this, which is rational, because you can't come out of it actually. You can actually make whatever it is you have made in that business, right? I don't know if it was a businessman who said that, take everything that I have, right? Every single kobo that I have made, every single dollar that I have made, pick me and take me to another place, another country where I have nothing to start with. Just give me a little time. I will build everything that I currently have in that other place, because it's a skill set that you have developed. And that's what happens really. As you are building the life that you want, you are developing a skill set. You are developing emotional resilience. You are developing all of those things, so that even when you lose everything, you haven't lost that. Right? It lives in the inside of you. Just like even the job situation. They sack you, but they didn't sack the skills that you've developed in that job.
True.
Right? So it means that you can, with that skill, get another job, or even start an organization based on the things you've learned. That's if you've been learning, which is a part of the preparation that we're talking about. Right? So at the end of the day, it still falls back to how you are able to interpret that situation that has befallen you or has happened at that point in time. To say that, am I rational about the way I'm interpreting this, or am I irrational in the way I'm interpreting it?
Which means that sometimes you are even prepared without knowing that
exactly.
you are prepared.
Yes.
But you know that the first thing that is attacked in all this conversation we're having is your emotions. You can't legislate emotions. You can't even legislate your reaction about any particular thing. That is why the first thing that will come out of the mouth of a clergyman when they tell the person, irrespective of faith, when they tell the person something unfortunate has happened, I've heard as jokes, some people will say the first thing that the clergyman said was yepa.
I was thinking the clergyman said it is well.
So sometimes you can't legislate emotions.
Yeah.
You can't legislate our humanity from some of the things that happen to us. Yeah. We are human. We will react in a particular way. Yeah. Unfortunately, when a thing happens the first time, our initial reaction may not be this rational thing you are thinking about.
It is most likely going to be based on how that person has trained themselves to react to smaller things even before that time. Because there's what is called reflexive thoughts. The same way we have reflex actions. For instance, you yawn without thinking about it. You just yawn. Your knee jerks. You sneeze. All of those are reflex actions. But it's also what is called reflexive thoughts. Reflexive thoughts are your predominant way of thinking about things. So they could either be rational or irrational. So a lot of people, for instance, have trained themselves to think irrational about things, so that when something happens, I don't know if you've met such people, their first way of thinking about that thing, of reacting, is really negative.
Yepa.
That's their reflexive thinking, right? They didn't prepare for it. It just happens. But there are other people that no matter what happens, their first reaction is usually a sense of calm,
rational,
just usually rational.
They're calm, yes.
The way they have also trained themselves to think over time.
Yes.
So when things happen to us, our reflexive thoughts will show. If we have trained ourselves to be rational, it will show. If we have trained ourselves to be irrational, it will also show.
Okay, if I ask you another question, I have to take another 5 minutes, but we are out of time.
So we should we should train ourselves as we go along. Is what you're saying?
Very importantly.
Perhaps the next question will be how. Don't answer that question because our time is out. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Mike Miracle Ihwama is a clinical psychologist. So, Alera's favorite segment is what we are going to next. She calls it
the home stretch.
We'll be right back.